"Mom, can he live with us?" Grace froze. The paper grocery bag in her arms crinkled as she glanced down at her daughter. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Anna pointed through the cold glass of the bus window. Her dark brown eyes were locked on a man lying sprawled on the icy sidewalk outside MacArthur's pharmacy. It was mid-December in South Chicago, and the wind had teeth. "That man, Mom. He's not moving." Her voice cracked. He looks like he's crying." Grace followed her gaze. The man was white, around his 40s, dressed in what used to be a fine wool coat now soaked and stained. His hair was disheveled, thick, and graying at the temples. He leaned against a lamppost like he'd been dropped there. A bottle of expensive whiskey lay half empty at his feet, and his lips were bloodied. Someone had hit him, or maybe he'd fallen. "Keep your eyes forward," Grace said quickly, pushing through the exiting passengers. "Let's get home." But Anna dug in her heels. "We can't leave him. What if he dies, Mom?" "He's drunk, Anna," Grace hissed under her breath. "He's a stranger, lying in the snow with liquor in his hand. This is not our business." Anna's face fell. "But you always tell me to help people when no one else will." Grace inhaled sharply, caught in the hypocrisy of her own teachings. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what part touched your heart the most. And if you believe in the power of kindness, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. They stepped off the bus and approached slowly. The man groaned, clutching his side. Blood had dried on his temple. Up close, his face was handsome underneath the bruises and haunted. He muttered something under his breath. Grace crouched beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, blue, piercing, even in pain. They took everything," he slurred. "They lied. Both of them." "Who did?" Grace asked cautiously. He looked at her like he wasn't really seeing her. "She was my world, and he was my brother in everything but blood. Now they're together, and I'm out here." A wave of whiskey breath hit her. Grace flinched. "Mom," Anna whispered, "please, just one night." "No," Grace snapped. "I'm not bringing a drunk stranger into our home." Anna stepped between her and the man. "He's not just drunk. He's broken. Exactly why he's dangerous," Grace argued. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Neither do you," Anna said, defiant. Grace's hands trembled slightly, more from fear than cold. She looked around. No one else was stopping. No one cared. Then the man suddenly wretched, vomiting on the concrete. Anna jumped back. Grace caught her breath. "Okay," Grace said finally. "One night, and only because he'll freeze out here." Back at their apartment, a third-floor walk-up with flickering hallway lights and a heater that groaned like it was dying, Grace helped the man to the couch. Anna brought him a wet cloth and held it out. "Here, you're bleeding." He looked at her like he hadn't seen kindness in years. "You shouldn't help people like me." Anna said nothing, just handed him the cloth. Grace returned with a bottle of rubbing alcohol and gauze. "Do you have a name?" He hesitated. "Will." Just Will?" "Just Will," he echoed, though the name didn't fit the tailored coat or the way he carried himself, even in misery. She noticed his cufflinks tarnished but once expensive, and around his neck, barely visible under his collar, was a small platinum tag engraved with the initials BWH. Grace narrowed her eyes. "You're not just some guy from the street, are you?" He looked away. "Doesn't matter anymore. Money, houses, private jets, it all goes cold when your heart gets ripped out." "What happened to you?" she asked, voice softening. He laughed bitterly. "My best friend and my girlfriend. One stole my heart, the other stole my company. They left me with nothing, not even pride." Anna sat beside him. "You're not nothing." "Anna, go to your room," Grace ordered. "But Mom." "Now." Anna went, reluctantly, her small shoulders tight with frustration. Grace sat across from Will. "I don't know who you really are, but if you bring danger to my daughter, I swear I will call the cops without blinking." He met her eyes. "Fair deal." She watched him as he leaned back into the couch, eyes closed, body trembling. Her instincts screamed caution, but something deeper, older, and maybe foolish whispered, "People don't fall like this unless they've been pushed." She got up and shut the door to the hallway. Snow tapped gently at the window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren howled, but inside their tiny apartment, an unsettling quiet settled in. Grace didn't know it yet, but tonight, she hadn't just brought in a broken man. She'd opened the door to a storm she wasn't ready for. Morning crept in through the slats of the blinds, casting soft golden stripes across the faded carpet. The apartment smelled of eggs and instant coffee. Grace stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping pancakes on a scratched skillet, her mind replaying last night on a loop. The man Will was still asleep on the couch, curled beneath the old quilt from her grandmother. He hadn't moved much since she laid him down, though once or twice during the night she thought she'd heard him whispering in his sleep. Names, maybe, or curses. Anna padded into the kitchen, hair a mess, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Is he still here? Grace nodded. He's sleeping. Do you think he's a bad guy? Grace didn't answer right away. I think he's someone who's lost more than we'll ever know. Anna sat at the table, swinging her legs. He's not like the other men who sleep on the sidewalk. He talks different. Grace poured coffee into her chipped mug. He said he was betrayed by his best friend and his girlfriend. Anna's mouth fell open. Like in the movies? Worse, Grace murmured. They both turned at the sound of movement. Will sat up slowly, blinking against the sunlight. His face was still bruised, but cleaner. The swelling around his eye had gone down, revealing pale blue eyes that looked out of place in their cramped living room. Good morning, Grace said cautiously. He looked at her, then at Anna, who waved. Will cleared his throat. I didn't dream this, did I? You actually brought me home. You collapsed in front of my daughter, Grace said bluntly. She wouldn't let me walk away. He nodded. She's got a heart. She gets that from me, Grace added. Will chuckled softly, then winced. My ribs feel like they went 10 rounds with a freight train. You want pancakes? Anna piped up. They're not fancy, but they're good. Will glanced at Grace, who gave a slight nod. Sure, if it's no trouble. Soon they sat around the small table. Will ate slowly, as if savoring each bite like it was his first real meal in days. So, Grace said, watching him, you want to tell me who you really are? He paused mid-chew, then set his fork down. I told you, I'm Will. That's not the name on your tag. He looked up sharply. You saw that? I work in a hospital, remember? I noticed details. He sighed, leaning back. Fine. Bernard William Harlan. But that name doesn't mean anything anymore. Anna's eyes widened. Wait, the Bernard Harlan? The one who disappeared? Grace shot her a look. You've heard of him? I saw it on YouTube. People thought he got kidnapped or killed. Will Bernard rubbed his temples. I wasn't kidnapped. I walked away. Why? Grace asked. He stared out the window for a long moment. Because everything I built, everything I believed in, was ripped out from under me. My best friend Derek, he was my COO, my college roommate, my brother in every way but blood. He manipulated the board, convinced them I was unfit, said I was unstable after my mother passed. He paused. He had help. The woman I loved. The girlfriend? Grace asked. Bernard nodded. Elena, I was planning to propose. Turns out she'd been with him for months. They used my grief against me. When I finally found out, I snapped. Not violently, just. I broke, got drunk, got lost. Didn't care if I came back. Why didn't you fight them? Grace asked, her voice sharper than she intended. I tried, but power plays like that, they don't happen in courtrooms. They happen behind closed doors. I didn't have the strength. So I left. Anna stared at him, open-mouthed. That's horrible. Yeah, he muttered. It was. Grace folded her arms. So what now? You just stay hidden forever? I hadn't planned that far, he admitted. Didn't think I'd make it through the week. A long silence settled over them. Then Anna, her voice small, said, You can stay here. Grace raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I'm just saying, he's not dangerous. He's hurt. Will looked away. I can't stay. I've already taken too much. No one's asking you to, Grace said. But maybe you do need somewhere safe. Just until you figure things out. He stared at her, surprised. You don't even know me. No, I don't, she admitted. But I know what it's like to have no one believe in you. Anna smiled. We believe you. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Grace froze. 3 sharp raps. Not a neighbor's knock. She walked to the peephole and peered out. A tall man in a long black coat stood outside, holding what looked like a leather portfolio. "Who is it?" Bernard asked, already rising. "No idea," Grace said, heart pounding. "But I don't like it." He crossed the room quickly and ducked out of sight. "Don't let him see me." "What do you mean?" "I don't know who he is. But if he's from the board, or a lawyer, or Derek's people, I don't want them to know I'm alive." "Not yet." The knock came again, firmer this time. Grace whispered, "Go to the bedroom, now." Bernard hesitated, then nodded, and disappeared down the hall. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm looking for someone. He may have passed through this neighborhood recently." Grace held the door tighter. "We don't take visitors." He handed her a photo, grainy, faded, but clearly Bernard, in a suit. "Have you seen this man?" the stranger asked. Grace looked at the picture, then at the man, and with her heartbeat thudding in her ears, she said, "Number, never seen him in my life." Grace closed the door slowly, her fingers lingering on the knob even after it clicked shut. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure Anna could hear it from across the room. "Who was it?" Anna whispered. Grace didn't answer right away. She turned to check the hallway, then looked toward the back bedroom. Bernard hadn't returned yet. She crossed the living room and opened the bedroom door a crack. He stood by the window, watching the alley below. "It's clear," she said. "He's gone." Bernard turned. "What did he want?" "Said he was looking for someone. Showed me a photo. It was you, younger, clean-shaven. You looked happier." Bernard sat on the edge of the bed. "Then they know I'm alive." Grace closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "You said you didn't want anyone to know. Why?" "I don't trust them," he said flatly. "If Derek knows where I am, he'll do whatever it takes to finish the job." "You're a billionaire," Grace replied. "Can't you just hire lawyers and take it all back?" Bernard laughed without humor. "Do you think this is about money? It was never about the dollars. It's about control, reputation, image. Derek didn't just want my company, he wanted my story, my legacy. If I come back now, it won't be as a victim. They'll twist it. Make me look unstable. Dangerous." "You're not unstable," Grace said. He gave her a look. "You let me into your house drunk, bleeding, and ranting about betrayal. Doesn't exactly scream pillar of mental health." Grace folded her arms. "I've seen worse." Outside, Anna was sitting quietly on the couch, hugging her knees. Grace stepped out and sat beside her. "You okay?" she asked gently. Anna nodded. "Are we helping a criminal?" Grace blinked. "Number, I don't think so. But people are looking for him. Sometimes good people run from bad situations, Anna. That doesn't make them criminals." Anna looked down. "I just don't want him to go away." Grace stroked her daughter's hair. "He's not going anywhere tonight." That evening, Bernard stayed mostly in the bedroom. He emerged once, just long enough to eat a bowl of soup and thank Anna for the blanket she'd left folded on the foot of the bed. He was quieter now, thoughtful, guarded. Grace sat across from him as he ate. "You need a plan." "I had one," he muttered. "Drink myself into oblivion, wake up in another life. Turns out that one failed. Well, now you're in my apartment. My daughter knows your name, and some guy in a black coat is knocking on my door asking questions. So we're past the point of pretending none of this is real." Bernard looked up at her. "You're not scared?" "I'm exhausted. Will or Bernard, or whatever you want me to call you, but I'm not scared. I'm angry. Angry that people like Derek can wreck someone's life and keep smiling on magazine covers. Angry that you let them." He didn't reply. She leaned forward. "If you really want to disappear, I can't stop you. But if you're going to stay here, you need to stop hiding and start thinking." Bernard took a slow breath. "I need to know what Derek is planning. If he's sending people after me, it means something's changed." He's nervous. "You want to fight back?" she said. "I want to be ready if he comes knocking." 2 days passed. The man in the black coat didn't return. But Grace noticed a black SUV parked across from the building more than once. Different license plates, but the same model. She began taking alternate routes to work, walking Anna to school herself. Her neighbors started whispering something about visitors and questions, But she said nothing. Bernard kept to the apartment, shaved, cleaned up. With a haircut, he looked less like a vagrant and more like a man who once sat on the cover of Forbes. His bruises were fading, but his anger hadn't. Anna adored him. She'd sit beside him with her homework, asking questions about math, geography, and how airplanes worked. He answered patiently, even warmly. Grace watched them sometimes, heart tight with caution and something else she wasn't ready to name. One night, as snow dusted the windows, Bernard stood beside Grace in the kitchen. "I want to make contact," he said quietly. "With who?" "An old friend. Someone who might still be on my side." "Is that safe?" "I'll be careful. I'll write the message by hand. No email, no phone, just one letter." Grace handed him a pen and paper. "What if they don't reply?" she asked. "Then I'll know." He wrote for over an hour, folded the letter neatly, slipped it into an envelope without a return address. The only name he wrote, Harold Wexler. Grace didn't ask who that was. The next morning, Bernard handed the envelope to a boy selling newspapers by the corner store and paid him $20 to drop it in a mailbox across town. Then he returned to the apartment and waited. 3 days later, someone left a small brown package at their door. No note, no knock. Grace brought it inside. Inside the box, an old flip phone and a thumb drive. Bernard powered the phone on. One number saved. W. He stared at it, unmoving. "Who is it?" Grace asked. "My last chance," he whispered. He pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice. "You're alive." Bernard closed his eyes. "Harold, I need your help." "I figured. You're being hunted." "I know. And she, Elena, she's not finished." "What's on the drive?" Bernard asked. "Everything you need to know," the voice said. "But Bernard, once you open it, there's no going back." He looked at Grace, at Anna, then back at the phone. "I'm already back." Bernard sat in the middle of the kitchen table, laptop open, thumb drive in hand. The room was quiet, except for the low buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the radiator. Anna had gone to bed early, tucked in under layers of blankets with her favorite book. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, unsure whether she should be afraid of what they were about to find, or more afraid of what it might mean if they found nothing. "You sure this is a good idea?" she asked. Bernard didn't look up. "Number. But I'm more afraid of staying blind." He inserted the thumb drive. The screen flickered. A single folder appeared. Sable Documents. Harlan Holdings. He clicked. Hundreds of files populated the screen, PDFs, scanned memos, spreadsheets, internal communications, and legal drafts. But one document stood out. Sable, Phase 4, Project, Doc. He opened it. It was a contract, dated 6 weeks before his disappearance, drafted between Derek Wexley, acting CEO of Harlan Holdings, and a firm called Sable Industrial Development, an entity Bernard had never approved or heard of during his tenure. He scrolled further. Attached was a project overview, a land development deal involving properties Bernard had publicly refused to touch low-income housing districts in Detroit and South Chicago. The language was clear: evictions, demolition, and redevelopment into luxury condos. "I said no to this," Bernard muttered. "I told the board we wouldn't touch those communities. We were going to invest in them, not displace them." Grace leaned closer. "So he waited for you to disappear, then pushed the deal through." Bernard nodded, "and forged my signature on the approval drafts." He clicked through a few more files, emails between Derek and Elena. Bernard's face tightened as he read. "I still have the original document," one email from Elena read. "But if he ever resurfaces, we'll claim he was unstable. We'll say he signed off, then had a breakdown." "They planned everything," Bernard whispered. "From the start." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now you have proof." "It's not enough," he said. "This isn't a movie, Grace. People like Derek don't go to jail because of a USB stick. They spin, they discredit. They twist the story until no one knows what to believe. So what are you going to do?" "I need to hit back publicly, on my terms, not through a courtroom, through people." He looked up at her, something in his gaze shifting resolve, taking root where grief once lived. "Grace, I want to tell my story." The next morning, Bernard asked to borrow Grace's old laptop. He spent hours typing, deleting, rewriting. His hands moved with a kind of urgency, like a man trying to put his entire soul into one message. He didn't eat, barely drank. Occasionally he'd stare at the wall, jaw tight, before diving back in. That night, he called Anna into the living room. "I need your help," he said gently. Anna's eyes lit up. "Really? I want you to listen to something I wrote. And you tell me if it makes sense." She nodded and sat on the couch, legs tucked under her. Bernard took a breath, opened the document, and began to read aloud. It wasn't technical. It wasn't business jargon. It was a confession. A story. He told of how he built Harlan Holdings from a spare bedroom operation into a billion-dollar enterprise, how he focused on community investment, how he believed in second chances because his own mother had been a drug addict who got clean thanks to a neighborhood rehab center that Harlan Holdings eventually helped fund. He told of Derek, his best friend, and Elena, the woman he loved, how they betrayed him, how they used his grief after his mother's death to paint him as erratic, how the board voted him out, how he disappeared rather than fight a machine he couldn't control. He ended with this: "I am not writing this for sympathy. I am writing because power unchecked is a danger to everyone. I was silent, and my silence was used as permission. Not anymore." Anna looked up at him. "You sound like a superhero." Bernard laughed softly. "I feel like a tired old man with a laptop." Grace stood nearby, arms folded, eyes glossy. "It's good. Really good. I want to record it," he said. "A video, one take, no edits." "We can use my phone," Grace said. "Just, don't forget what you're risking." "I know," he nodded. "But I've already lost everything. If I don't do this, what's left?" They filmed the video in the kitchen that night. Bernard wore a plain navy sweater. No makeup. No lighting crew, just a single desk lamp to his left and the hum of their tiny fridge in the background. He spoke directly to the camera. No anger, no bitterness, just honesty. Grace uploaded the video to an anonymous account. Within hours, it began to spread. By morning, it had over 10,000 views. By lunchtime, over 500, null. And by nightfall, Bernard's name was trending worldwide. But not everyone celebrated. Grace received a call at work from an unknown number. A voice she didn't recognize said calmly, "You've made a mistake." She hung up immediately. When she returned home, Bernard was staring at the window. "There's a black SUV downstairs again," he said. "Different plates this time." Anna peeked out the curtain. "Is that them?" "Maybe," Bernard said, "but they're not hiding anymore." Grace locked the door, drew the blinds. "We're not running." "No," Bernard said. "We're not." He walked to the desk, picked up the phone Harold had given him, and dialed the saved number. "Harold," he said when the line picked up. "It's out. They know, and they're watching." There was a pause. "Then it's time," Harold said. "Meet me tomorrow, noon, Union Station. Come alone." Bernard hung up. Grace stepped forward. "Are you sure you can trust him?" Bernard's eyes narrowed. "Number, but if I'm going to take this to the end, I can't do it alone." She nodded slowly. "Then I guess we're in this together." He looked at her, something softer in his eyes now. "You already were." The morning was gray and heavy with the promise of snow. Chicago's wind cut through Bernard's coat like knives, but he kept walking. Collar turned up, eyes low beneath a borrowed baseball cap. Union Station loomed ahead like a sleeping beast, grand, busy, indifferent to secrets. Grace had offered to come with him, but Bernard insisted on going alone. "If this goes wrong," he told her, "I want you and Anna far away." She hadn't liked it, neither had Anna, but they both understood. Grace gave him a burner phone and strict instructions. One call every hour, or she would assume the worst. Now he stood inside the station's grand hall, surrounded by travelers dragging suitcases, sipping coffee, staring at departure boards. To them, he was nobody. Just another man waiting for a train. A tall man in a trench coat approached from the far end of the terminal. His walk was calm, deliberate. Bernard recognized Harold instantly, still lean, still sharp, though his hair was grayer now, and his eyes more cautious. They didn't embrace. "Nice disguise," Harold said, voice dry. "Didn't want to draw attention," Bernard replied. "Too late for that." Your video's up to 12 million views. Then Derek's panicking. Harold gave a slow nod. He's shifting assets. Lawyers are circling. But it's more than that. They moved to a bench by the far wall. Bernard kept his back to the room. I pulled some files, Harold continued. Sable development isn't just about gentrification. It's laundering money through shell companies, fake investors. Millions, maybe billions, moved offshore. Derek's covering for someone bigger. Elena? Harold hesitated. Possibly, but there's another name. A private equity firm called Oxley and Grant. Quiet, expensive, connected to several political donors. If they're involved, this goes beyond corporate theft. Bernard exhaled. I'm going to need more than public sympathy. Harold handed him a folder. Inside bank records, transfer receipts, communications between Derek and Oxley. Most of it circumstantial, but the pattern is clear. If we can tie it to one real-world result like a displaced tenant or a closed shelter, we can force a public investigation. Bernard opened the folder and scanned the first page. His jaw clenched. This address, that's 3 blocks from Grace's apartment. Exactly, Harold said. One of the last properties you personally approved for redevelopment under your original plan. It was supposed to become a low-income clinic. Derek repurposed it. The new buyers want luxury lofts, and the construction's starting next month. Bernard stood abruptly. We need to stop it. Harold grabbed his arm. Not yet. You rush this, they'll bury the evidence. We build the case, then go to the press with the second wave. You already shook the tree. Now we catch what falls. Bernard looked toward the station exit, heart racing. They're watching Grace, he said. I know it. Then you need to disappear again. Just for a while. Bernard shook his head. I promised her I wouldn't. You can't protect them from the front line, Harold warned. If they see you, they'll come for them too. Bernard hesitated, then handed Harold the folder back. Keep digging. I'll find the people affected. Get their stories. He turned to leave. Bernard, Harold said, voice low. This doesn't end clean. Be ready for that. Bernard didn't answer. Back at the apartment, Grace was pacing. He's late, she said, glancing at the clock for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Anna looked up from the couch. Maybe his phone died. Or maybe someone followed him. The knock on the door made her jump. She moved quickly, peering through the peephole. Bernard. Alone. She opened the door and pulled him inside. What happened? He handed her the burner phone. Signal was jammed at the station. They were scanning for pings. Grace frowned. Who's they? Whoever Derek hired to keep tabs on me. He dropped onto the couch, exhausted. Anna hurried over with a glass of water. Did you see your friend? Bernard nodded. Harold's still sharp. He gave me enough to start connecting dots. Grace sat beside him. So what now? We go local. We talk to the people affected. We film it. Real stories, families, workers, people Derek's development is hurting. You're talking about a full-on documentary. Exactly, he said. They tried to silence me with corporate press. I'll fight back with human truth. Grace smiled despite herself. You really were made for this. I was made to help, Bernard said quietly. I just forgot how for a while. He turned to Anna. Do you still want to help? She grinned. I already charged the camera. Over the next week, they worked quietly, methodically. Bernard and Grace interviewed tenants facing eviction, nurses losing jobs due to closed clinics, retired veterans whose homes were being bulldozed. Anna handled the camera like a pro, asking questions no adult dared to. One man cried when Bernard told him the project had been approved under false pretenses. You mean, this wasn't supposed to happen? He asked. Bernard shook his head. Number I fought for the opposite. Another woman, a mother of 3, offered them dinner after the interview. No one ever listens to people like us, she said. By the end of the week, they had 10 hours of footage. Grace stayed up all night, helping Bernard edit the first cut. The new video went live on a Sunday morning, titled simply, The Cost of Corruption. It was raw, real, unflinching, and it exploded online. Reporters called. Activists rallied. A senator tweeted it with the caption, Time to investigate Harlan Holdings. But with visibility came danger. That night, as they returned from a grocery run, Grace noticed her door was slightly open. She pushed it slowly. The apartment had been ransacked. Drawers dumped. Cabinets open. Bernard's laptop gone. Anna gasped. Grace pulled her close. Bernard stared at the wreckage, his jaw locked. They know we're close, he said. Grace nodded. So what do we do now? Bernard looked at them both. Then at the broken pieces of the life they were trying to rebuild. We don't back down, he said. Now, we go public, in person. The community center on Halstead Avenue was packed. Foldable chairs lined every corner of the old gymnasium, creaking under the weight of neighbors, activists, and media personnel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of stale coffee, nervous sweat, and camera equipment filled the air. At the front of the room, a modest stage had been set up with 2 microphones, a projector, and a modest cloth banner that read, "Voices from the Ground, Truth, Transparency, and Community." Grace adjusted her blazer in the hallway behind the stage, heart pounding in her ears. Bernard paced nearby, hands trembling, not from fear but from anticipation. Anna stood in the corner, filming everything with her now beloved camera, her expression focused, mature beyond her years. "You still have time to back out," Grace said, half teasing, half serious. Bernard stopped pacing. "This time, I'm not walking away." She reached over and straightened his collar. "Then go give them a reason to believe again." He gave her a soft, grateful smile. A few minutes later, Bernard stepped onto the stage. A hush fell over the crowd, save for the occasional cough or the click of a camera shutter. Grace followed and stood slightly behind him, hands clasped. Bernard took a moment to look around the room, faces of all colors, all ages, all waiting. "My name is Bernard William Harlan," he said, voice firm. "And I'm here to tell you the truth." Gasps echoed softly through the crowd. "I disappeared 9 months ago. Some of you thought I died. Others believed I ran. The truth is I was betrayed." He paused, then continued. "My best friend and my partner Derek Wexley manipulated my company, the board, and the media. He forged documents, pushed illegal development deals, and disguised displacement as progress. He was not alone. A network of silent players, investors, lobbyists, and corporate thieves stood by, profited, and let it happen. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Bernard motioned toward the projector. Grace clicked the remote. The screen lit up with photos of homes torn down, families forced out, closed clinics, empty lots surrounded by steel fences. These communities were never supposed to be demolished, Bernard continued. "I fought for them. I said no. That's why I was removed." Someone from the crowd shouted, "Why should we believe you now?" Bernard didn't flinch. "Because I've lived among you for the last month, in hiding, in fear, but also in hope. I've heard your stories, I've seen the pain, and I've recorded every bit of it." The projector now showed short clips, testimonies from locals, some crying, some angry, all real. "I am not here to ask for sympathy," Bernard said. "I am here to demand accountability." The crowd erupted into applause. Reporters rushed forward, yelling questions. Bernard stepped back from the mic. Grace stepped forward. "We have submitted these documents and testimonies to federal investigators," she said. "There will be legal consequences." Another hand shot up. "Are you afraid, Mr. Harlan?" Bernard turned back to the mic. "I was, but not anymore." That night, the event footage went viral. National networks aired it within hours. Hashtags like #HarlanSpeaks and #Voices from the Ground trended across platforms. At 2:43 a.m., Grace's phone buzzed. She rubbed her eyes and answered. A man's voice, low and shaking. "You made your point." She sat upright. "Who is this?" "You're done now. Stay quiet, or the next door that opens won't be yours." The line went dead. Grace stared into the dark room. Bernard was still awake, sitting by the window, watching the street below. "Was it him?" he asked. She nodded. "He's rattled," Bernard said. "We hit a nerve, or poked a sleeping giant." He stood, walked over, and knelt beside Anna, who was sleeping on the couch. Her small hand clutched her camera even in sleep. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered, "but I won't run from it." The next morning, Bernard received a call from Harold. "They're preparing a counterstrike," Harold warned. "You'll be hit with lawsuits, defamation, breach of contract, even mental health claims. They'll paint you unstable." "Let them," Bernard said. "I've got receipts." That's not all, Harold added. Elena's holding a press conference. Today, she's going to accuse you of coercion. She's going to say you abused your power. Bernard exhaled slowly. Of course she is. She's scared. That's why she's lashing out. I need to speak again, Bernard said. Not through a press release, not a tweet. I need people to see my eyes. Grace nodded from across the room. Then we do another video. Raw. Honest. Again. That afternoon, Bernard sat in front of Anna's camera. No lights. No edits. I was in love with Elena. I trusted Derek. I believed our company stood for something more than profit. I was wrong. Not just about them, but about the silence I kept. Silence helps the corrupt thrive. He paused, his voice faltering. I was raised by a woman who clawed her way out of addiction to raise me. She believed in truth. She believed in helping people, even when it was messy, even when it cost something. He looked directly into the lens. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for your attention. Because if this can happen to me, it's already happening to people who have no platform, no voice, no wealth to shield them. The video went live at 7:12 p.m. By 8 o'clock, it was on every major news channel. By 9:30, Derek Wexley released a formal statement. By midnight, federal agents raided the Sable development offices in 3 states. Back in their apartment, the mood was quiet but charged. Anna sat cross-legged, watching her video play back for the 5th time. You think we won? She asked. Bernard didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. We lit the fire, he said. Now we see what it burns. Grace stood by the window, watching the street, and though the night outside was still cold, for the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest warmth of something beginning to change. 3 days after the second video dropped, everything changed. The Department of Justice confirmed it had opened a formal investigation into Harlan Holdings and its subsidiaries. A statement from the DOJ described significant irregularities in corporate filings, real estate acquisitions, and community displacement protocols. But to Bernard, it was more than bureaucracy, it was validation. The call came at 10:17 a.m. from Harold. They froze Derek's personal accounts, Harold said, voice practically buzzing. 3 shell companies have been exposed, and at least 2 board members have lawyered up. Elena canceled her press conference. Bernard didn't smile. Not yet. That's a start, he said. But the people affected still don't have homes. The clinic's still a parking lot, and there's still a price to pay. Oh, Grace watched him from the kitchen table, quietly sipping her coffee. You're not going to rest, are you? Not until I see Derek answer for it himself, publicly. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and slow, like feathers drifting from the sky. The world felt suspended in a moment between collapse and clarity. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a summons. A real envelope, cream-colored, hand-delivered by a courier in a dark suit who said nothing and left the moment Bernard took it. Inside, an invitation. Mr. Harlan, we request your attendance at an emergency board meeting of Harlan Holdings, to be held at the corporate headquarters, the 26th of January, 11 a.m. Attendance is non-compulsory, but your presence is strongly encouraged. Respectfully, Board of Directors. Bernard stared at the page. They want me back, he said, almost in disbelief. Grace stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. They're scared. They need a scapegoat, or they need to beg for your silence. I won't give them either. The building hadn't changed. The glass tower on Madison Avenue gleamed like always, modern, sterile, soulless. But as Bernard approached its doors, dressed in a charcoal suit and flanked by Harold and a small security detail, something inside him shifted. He wasn't the man who left this building 9 months ago. He was harder, quieter, sharper. The receptionist looked up, visibly startled. She scrambled to call someone, but Bernard just nodded. I know where I'm going. The boardroom on the 45th floor was already full. Derek sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, tan flawless, his tailored navy suit a shade too perfect. He looked like a man who hadn't lost anything. But his eyes told another story, tight, nervous. Elena was there too. Her presence was ghost-like, pale and distracted. She didn't meet Bernard's gaze. The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably as Bernard entered. He took the seat directly across from Derek. No one spoke for a moment. Then Derek smiled. Well, the ghost returns. I was never dead, Bernard said evenly, just disgusted. We've all made mistakes, Derek said. This has gone far enough. The media's feeding frenzy, the criminal investigations, you can stop this. Bernard leaned back. You forged my signature, lied to the board, displaced entire neighborhoods, and now you want a truce? Derek kept his smile. We can fix it. Together. There's no we left, Bernard replied. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for accountability. He pulled a small folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside, his official reinstatement petition, backed by 5 community leaders, 3 city officials, and the signatures of 2 key shareholders. I'm invoking Clause 12B of our bylaws, he said. Emergency reinstatement in the event of proven misconduct by acting CEO. Gasps filled the room. Derek's mask cracked. You don't have the votes, he snapped. Bernard's voice stayed calm. We'll see. The board chair cleared his throat. We've reviewed the documentation. Given the evidence and public response, the vote is valid. He turned to the others. All in favor of reinstating Mr. Harlan as interim CEO until a full audit and trial review are completed? Hands slowly began to rise, one by one, until all but Derek and Elena had voted. Derek slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. Bernard met his gaze. No, Derek, this is justice. Elena stood quietly. For a moment, she looked like she might say something, confess, defend, cry. But instead, she picked up her purse and walked out. Silence followed. Derek turned to Bernard. You won't survive this. You think the public loves you now, but they'll turn on you too. Bernard stood. Then I'll fall with the truth, but I won't stay silent to keep people comfortable. He walked out, leaving Derek sitting alone in a room full of people who no longer believed him. That evening, Bernard returned home to Grace and Anna. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, but something inside him had settled. Grace handed him a bowl of chili. So, I'm back in, he said, but only until the audit's done. And Derek? Out, for now. Anna jumped up and hugged him. Does this mean we can fix the clinic? Bernard smiled. That's the first thing on the list. Later that night, as the snow fell heavier and the apartment glowed warm from the inside out, Bernard stood at the window, hands in his pockets. Grace joined him. You did it, she said. He shook his head. We did it. She rested her head against his shoulder. For the first time in months, Bernard felt still. Not running, not hiding, just home. The next few days were a whirlwind. Bernard's name was everywhere. Headlines hailed his return as a symbol of redemption. Interviews were requested from every network. Protesters gathered outside Harlan Holdings, some in support, some in anger, still reeling from the past damage. For Bernard, the attention felt strange. He'd been invisible so long it almost didn't feel real to be seen again. But being seen didn't mean being safe. The morning after his reinstatement, Bernard stepped into his new yet familiar office. The skyline was still the same, glass and concrete stretching toward the gray sky. But the desk, the air, the feeling, it was all different now. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about responsibility. Grace came with him that day, not as a guest, but as his new community liaison officer. He'd insisted. No one has a better sense of the people we're fighting for, he told the board. She hadn't said yes easily, but eventually, she agreed. She would speak for those no one else was listening to. Anna, of course, was thrilled. Does this mean I get my own desk too? She'd asked, half joking. Bernard was reviewing a list of properties when his phone buzzed. It was Harold. Bernard, we've got a problem. He stood up instantly. What kind? Remember Oxley and Grant, the private equity firm we flagged? Yeah. They just filed a motion in court challenging your reinstatement, claiming it violates shareholder rights. It's a stall tactic, but they're sending a message. Bernard clenched his jaw. They're not backing down. No, Harold said grimly. They're doubling down. Bernard ended the call and turned to Grace. We're not done. Not even close. She nodded. So what do? We do what they won't expect. We go back to the beginning. That night, Bernard returned to the neighborhood where the first illegal development project began. The lot was still fenced off, mud and rubble where the low-income housing used to be. A billboard loomed above. Future site of Halstead Lofts, luxury living, coming 2026. He stood staring at it for a long time, hands deep in his coat pockets. The cold didn't bother him as much anymore. Then he pulled out his phone and went live. "I stood here a year ago and made a promise to this community," he said into the camera. "Then I was pushed out. But I'm here again not as a CEO, but as a citizen. And I promise again we will rebuild this place for the people it was meant for." The video went viral within hours. The next day, Bernard met with the original displaced families. He brought in community leaders, social workers, urban planners. They walked the lot together, mapped out blueprints, debated funding options. It was messy, slow, but it was real. Still, resistance grew. A week later, Bernard received a letter at home unsigned, but clear. "You think this is a game? Keep pushing, and you won't like the ending." Grace read it and said nothing for a long time. Then she tore it in half. "You've scared them," she said. "That's progress." But Anna, listening from the hallway, spoke up quietly. "What if they try to hurt him again?" Bernard knelt in front of her. "Then I'll get back up. Every time. That's what fighting for something means." Anna nodded, though her eyes still held fear. Meanwhile, Derek was silent. No statements, no interviews, but rumors flew. He was trying to build alliances in the background, making calls, leveraging favors. Elena, on the other hand, resurfaced in a podcast interview. "I was manipulated," she said smoothly. "I thought Bernard had lost his mind. Derek told me he was paranoid, erratic. I see now that I was used." The host pressed her. "But you stayed silent while communities were destroyed." "I regret that deeply," she said, "and I'm ready to testify if asked." Bernard watched the clip on his laptop. "She's positioning herself. She'll flip to save herself." "Let her," Grace said. "The truth's bigger than her role in it." Still, it stung, to hear her voice, to see her not as the woman he loved, but as a player in something dark and strategic. The next board meeting was even more tense than the last. Bernard stood at the head of the table. Blueprints and ledgers spread before him. "This is the revised development plan for Halstead," he said. "Mixed-income housing, a medical clinic, and a co-op grocery store. Fully funded with redirected corporate bonuses and executive salary reductions." A few board members scoffed. One asked, "You expect us to approve that?" "No," Bernard said. "I expect you to remember why we started this company, and if you can't resign." A long silence followed. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The vote passed. Barely, but it passed. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Bernard stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes with Anna, while Grace packed lunches at the counter. "You know," Anna said, handing him a dripping spoon, "you're not like the billionaires on television." Bernard chuckled. "Why's that?" "They don't wash dishes." He smiled. "Maybe they should." A knock at the door startled them all. Grace moved first, peering through the peephole, then opened it. A man stood there in a suit. Late 50s. Face worn but kind. "I'm sorry to drop in," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you. I used to live on Halstead. You fought for us when no one else would." Bernard stepped forward, shaking his hand. "Thank you for staying strong." The man hesitated. "They'll keep coming, you know. The money, the pressure." "I know," Bernard said. "But now, so do they." As the man left, Grace locked the door behind him, then turned to Bernard. "We're in the storm now." He nodded. "But this time we brought our own thunder." The morning began with a jolt. At exactly 7:42 a.m., Bernard's phone buzzed with an alert from the security system at Harlan Holdings. The message was simple, direct, and chilling. "Unauthorized access detected, executive office, 45th floor." He dressed in under 5 minutes, kissed Grace and Anna goodbye, and was out the door before they could ask a single question. The city was still shaking off the frost of early morning when Bernard arrived at the glass tower on Madison Avenue. Security guards were already on the scene, standing outside the executive suite. The door had been forced open. Nothing appeared stolen, but the room had been searched. Not ransacked, searched. With precision, Bernard walked around his desk, inspecting every drawer, file cabinet, shelf. Then he saw it. A small embossed envelope lying neatly on his leather chair. New address. Nucial. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single photo, blurry, but unmistakable. It was a still frame from one of his recent neighborhood visits. In it, Anna could be seen in the background, holding her camera. Behind her, a man in a gray hoodie, face partially obscured, stood watching. On the back of the photo, a handwritten message. You protect the streets, but who protects your home? Bernard felt the ground tilt under him. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was personal. He called Grace immediately. Is Anna with you? Yes, she said quickly. Why? Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll explain everything when I get back. By noon, Bernard sat in a conference room with Harold and 2 digital security consultants. Surveillance footage from the building showed the intruder entering with a forged employee badge. They were in and out in under 10 minutes. They weren't looking for data, Harold said. They wanted to leave a message. Bernard placed the photo on the table. They wanted to remind me that Anna isn't invisible. Harold's jaw tightened. This changes everything. No, Bernard said firmly. It changes nothing. We keep going. But now we move smarter. Later that afternoon, Bernard sat in his apartment, watching Anna as she edited video footage on the living room floor. Her headphones were on, her legs crossed, face lit by the laptop screen. Grace stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She's tougher than you think, she said. She shouldn't have to be, Bernard replied. Grace walked over and sat beside him. You can't control every threat, but you can control how you respond. So what's next? He looked at her. We fight louder. The next step came in the form of a town hall, a massive gathering at the University of Chicago auditorium. Over 700 people packed into the space, with hundreds more watching via live stream. Bernard stepped onto the stage, not as a businessman, but as a citizen determined to finish what he started. He showed them the evidence again. Not just documents, but testimonies, maps, video footage. He explained how the developers used predatory tactics, how they masked displacement under the guise of revitalization. Then he dropped the hammer. We now have evidence that Oxley and Grant funded private surveillance operations to monitor whistleblowers, including myself and my family. Gasps echoed across the room. He paused, letting it settle. But we're not afraid, he said, eyes fierce. Because this isn't just about me. This is about every family who's been pushed out, priced out, or silenced. The applause that followed was thunderous. Grace joined him on stage, and Anna stood in the wings, filming. At the end of the event, Bernard made an open call. I need 10 volunteers, he said, to form the Community Oversight Committee. This won't be a figurehead role. You'll have real power, real say in what gets built and what doesn't. Over 40 people signed up within the hour. Back at the office, things began to fracture. Several board members who had remained quiet now approached Bernard privately. We never signed off on the surveillance, one said. We didn't know. You didn't ask, Bernard replied coldly. That's how corruption wins, through your silence. But he knew there were some still loyal to Derek. Late that evening, Harold returned with news. They're planning a shareholders' vote. Derek's team is calling for a recall. If they succeed, they can remove you again legally. When? 10 days. Bernard didn't flinch. Then we make the next 10 days count. That night, Bernard sat at his desk and wrote a letter, not for the board, not for the media, but for Anna. He placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and locked it in the apartment safe. Grace noticed. What is that? Just in case, he said. She touched his hand. We're not going to lose? No, he said. We're not. The next morning, Bernard received an anonymous email. The subject line read, They're meeting without you. Attached was a voice recording. In it, Derek's voice was unmistakable. We can't let this redemption arc win. Burn his past. Leak the documents. Make him the villain. You want control? This is how we take it back. Bernard listened twice. Then again. His hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. They were planning to twist his history, weaponize his mistakes, and destroy his reputation all over again. But this time, he was ready. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below. The wind howled, but he no longer heard it as a threat. It sounded like movement, like justice stirring, like change coming. The storm hit fast. By sunrise, Bernard's face was plastered across every major news outlet. but not in celebration, in condemnation. Headlines screamed, "Former CEO's secret past exposed. Harlan's financial misconduct uncovered. Once a hero, now under fire." He stood in his apartment living room, Grace on one side, Anna sitting silently on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. The television flashed images from his early 20s, grainy photos of parties, careless investments, even a failed startup that had left some investors furious. Worse still, doctored documents appeared, online emails fabricated to suggest Bernard had once approved evictions himself. "They took pieces of truth and poisoned them," Grace said, furious. "Twisted everything." "They don't need truth," Bernard muttered. "They just need doubt." His phone buzzed with texts, some of support, others angry, accusatory. He turned it off. Anna looked up. Will people believe them? He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. At the office, the atmosphere had shifted. The boardroom, once a place of cold calculation, now buzzed with uncertainty. A few members avoided eye contact. One even muttered, "You brought this on yourself." Harold met Bernard outside the elevator. "They're setting the stage for the shareholder vote," he said. "If you don't act fast, you'll lose control of the company again. And this time, permanently." Bernard exhaled. "Then let's hit back." Harold looked skeptical. "How?" "They're dragging your past through the mud." Bernard nodded. "Then I'll meet them there, on my terms." That evening, Bernard called a press conference. No suits, no teleprompter, just him, a mic, and a crowded room. "Today, you saw headlines," he began. "You saw photos of a man I once was, careless, arrogant, blind to the weight of my own privilege. You saw failures, you saw mistakes, and you should, because they're real." He paused, letting it settle. "I'm not proud of that version of me, but I won't hide from him either, because people don't grow by pretending they've always been right. They grow by choosing to be better." The room was silent. He stepped forward. "You've also seen forged documents, false narratives. They're scared of what happens when truth outshines wealth, when communities rise instead of scatter, when silence breaks." He looked directly at the cameras. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for accountability from myself, and from every hand that ever signed away someone else's home. If that makes me a target, so be it." The applause started slowly, then swelled. Back home, Grace watched with tears in her eyes. Anna filmed it all, quietly whispering, "That's my dad." But the opposition wasn't done. 2 days later, Elena released a video. "I was there," she said, voice trembling. "I saw Bernard approve the initial evictions. I trusted him. I didn't know how far it would go. It hit harder than any headline." Grace slammed the laptop shut. "She's lying," she snapped. "And she knows it." Bernard rubbed his temples. "She's not lying. Not entirely. I did approve early relocations. I thought they were voluntary. I didn't ask enough questions." Grace stood up. "So now what? Let her destroy you?" "No," he said. "I let her bury herself." That night, Bernard returned to the office. He searched through archived files, contracts, emails, legal notices, for hours. Until he found it. An internal memo from Derek to Elena dated just days before Bernard's forced leave. In it, Derek detailed how the voluntary relocations were a cover for aggressive buyouts. Elena had signed off on it. He brought it to Harold. "Get this verified," Bernard said. "Chain of custody, timestamps, metadata. I want this airtight." Harold smiled. "You just gave them the shovel for their own grave." On the day of the shareholders' vote, the tension in the conference hall was thick. Cameras lined the back wall. Journalists murmured. Investors whispered. Bernard stood before them all. "You've seen the campaign against me," he began. "You've heard the accusations. I don't deny my past, but I will not allow liars to rewrite the present." He clicked the remote. The memo appeared on the screen behind him. Gasps, murmurs. Then he showed the verification data. The signatures. The timeline. Silence. Then he said calmly, "The people trying to remove me are the ones who broke your trust in the first place." The board chair stood. All those in favor of retaining Bernard Harlan as CEO? Hands went up. Slowly, then more confidently. Derek's allies dropped their gazes. The motion passed. Bernard remained CEO. Again, that evening, Bernard didn't celebrate. He sat on the floor of Anna's room, helping her assemble a jigsaw puzzle. "Did you win?" she asked. He smiled. "Today, yes. And tomorrow?" He paused. "Tomorrow, we keep going, one piece at a time." Grace leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling at them. No victory speech, no champagne, just a puzzle, a family, and a future still being built. A thin mist blanketed the city the next morning. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that usually preceded a storm or followed one. For Bernard, it was the latter. The shareholder vote was over. He had won, but the air around him still felt heavy, unsettled. In the apartment, Anna sat by the window, sketching in her notebook. Grace moved quietly in the kitchen, brewing coffee and humming softly to an old Sam Cooke tune. Bernard stepped out of the shower, dried his face with a towel, and caught his own reflection in the mirror. There were more lines than before, more shadows under his eyes, but something else too still. A kind of hard-earned stillness. At the office, things weren't still at all. Harold was waiting for him in the conference room. "We have a leak," he said without preamble. Bernard raised an eyebrow. "Define leak." "Internal communications, project files. Someone's been feeding documents to a private blog. The blog's small but growing fast. They're calling you a false prophet, accusing you of using this redemption narrative to consolidate power." Bernard took a long breath. "So now I'm the villain for fixing what I didn't destroy." "Apparently," Harold replied dryly. Grace entered, holding a folder. "It gets worse. Look at this." She laid out printed screenshots, threats, targeted harassment, anonymous emails aimed at community leaders who had supported Bernard's new housing initiative. One message read, "Step back, or you'll lose everything like he did." Bernard clenched his fists. "They're not after just me anymore." "No," Grace said. "They're going after hope." Later that day, Bernard convened a private meeting in the smallest room on the 12th floor. It wasn't fancy, just a circle of chairs and a whiteboard. But it was honest. Present were 10 community organizers, 3 city council aides, 2 social workers, and Grace. "Why here?" one organizer asked. Bernard smiled. "Because big things should be planned in small rooms." He walked them through the next phase, the Halstead Project, a mixed-income housing and wellness center funded partially by Harlan Holdings and a new community grant. But he didn't pitch it like a CEO. He explained it like a neighbor. "Still, Dautzlinge, how do we know it won't get hijacked like the last ones?" one woman asked. "Because this time," Bernard said, "you're not advisors, you're the decision makers. No project moves forward without your vote." The room buzzed with murmurs. "Real power?" a man asked. "No strings?" "Only one string," Bernard replied. "Transparency." A slow, tentative round of applause started, then grew. That night, Bernard walked Anna to her piano lesson a few blocks from home. They strolled in silence, her small hand swinging in his. "Are you still scared?" she asked suddenly. Bernard looked down. "Of what?" "That someone will try to take you away again." He paused, then knelt in front of her. "I'm not scared," he said, "because this time, I know what I'm fighting for. And I know who's fighting with me." She smiled and handed him a folded paper from her coat pocket. It was a drawing him, Grace, and Anna standing in front of a building with a sign that read, Hope Center. He tucked it in his jacket pocket without a word. But the next day brought fire. Literally, at 3:17 a.m., Bernard's phone rang. It was Grace, voice shaking. "The construction site Halstead, it's burning." "Ove." By 3:45, he stood at the edge of the lot, smoke thick in the air, flames licking the framework of what was supposed to be the new beginning. Firefighters worked in frantic rhythm. Police stood by, already cordoning off the area. Grace arrived minutes later, wrapped in a coat, eyes wide with fury. It was arson, one officer confirmed. Accelerants were found at multiple ignition points. Bernard didn't speak. He just stared at the fire. Anna's drawing still sat in his pocket. He pulled it out, singed at the edges now, but the figures were still visible, still smiling. He whispered to himself, "You can burn the wood, but not the roots." The media swarmed within hours. Commentators speculated. Was it sabotage? Insurance fraud? A staged event? Bernard ignored them all. Instead, He returned to the lot that afternoon with a megaphone and a fold-out table. He called the community together, no invitation, no press release, just people. Over 100 came. Neighbors, volunteers, students, grandparents, even the skeptics. Bernard stood on a milk crate and held the megaphone like a preacher. They burned the building, he said, but not the mission. The crowd was silent, listening. We rebuild, stronger, smarter, together. One man shouted, "With what money?" Bernard pointed to the sky. "The foundation fund opens today. Every dollar will be matched by my personal account. And every receipt will be public." A woman raised her fist. "We're in." "Ugh." Cheers erupted. A young girl handed him a $20 bill. "It's my birthday money," she said. "But you need it more." Bernard knelt, eyes misty. "Thank you. This is how we win." That night, Bernard sat at the dining table with Grace and Anna. The fire was out. The damage was real, but so was the determination. "We just became a movement," Grace said. Bernard nodded. "Let's make sure we stay one." Outside, the city breathed slowly, the smoke settling. Inside, the embers of something greater had begun to glow. The morning after the fire, the ashes were still warm. But where most would see ruin, Bernard saw the beginning of a new resolve. The Halsted site, charred and blackened, became something more than a burned project. It became a symbol, a call to arms. Bernard stood before the husk of the building in a hard hat and boots, clipboard in hand. Grace was beside him, coat zipped tight, eyes scanning the skeletal remains. Volunteers were already showing up, college students, retired carpenters, parents with thermoses of coffee. No one asked to be paid, no one asked why. Anna had drawn a new poster the night before. It now hung on the chain-link fence. A big red heart over the words, "We still build." "Think it's too hopeful?" she'd asked. Bernard had smiled. "It's just right." At 10 a.m., the first town planning session began right there on site, under a white canopy tent with folding chairs and a beat-up dry erase board. No executives, no developers in suits. Just people. "I've got experience with plumbing," an older man said. "I can help when they lay the new pipes." "I teach architecture at the community college," said a woman. "My students can help design the new layout." Grace looked around, voice steady. "This time, the blueprint starts with you." Bernard stepped forward, holding up his clipboard. "This isn't about reclaiming what we lost. It's about redefining what we're building. Tell us what you need, not just what looks good on a brochure." The suggestions poured in. Affordable childcare, a rooftop garden, a shared workspace, housing with rent caps, a mental health clinic. Every voice was written down. Nothing was dismissed. "This is what corporate America fears," Bernard whispered to Grace. A crowd of people who realize they don't need permission to be powerful. By midweek, the new designs were already forming. Sketches layered over sketches. Google Docs updated by the hour. Harold secured emergency permits, and a crowdfunding page surpassed $500,000 in 3 days. Anonymous donors pitched in big, but it was the small ones that mattered most. $5 here, $12 there, each one a vote of confidence. But opposition was not silent. One evening, as Bernard reviewed construction estimates at home, Anna handed him a yellow envelope from the mail pile. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from Oxley and Grant. "The use of funds from Harlan Holdings toward the Halsted redevelopment project violates Section 9.2 of the shareholder agreement," it read. "All such actions must cease immediately pending review." Bernard slammed the letter on the table. "They're trying to freeze us again." Grace took it, read it, and calmly handed it back. "Then we make it public. Let them explain why they want to stop people from rebuilding their homes." That night, Bernard posted a video. He read the letter word for word, then looked into the camera. "To the shareholders who want to stop this, come down to the site. Look Anna in the eye. Look Grace in the eye. Look every volunteer in the eye and tell them their work has to stop. I dare you." The post went viral. The next morning, a senator called. "We're drafting emergency legislation to protect community-led redevelopment projects. I saw your video. You've got momentum." That same day, A new visitor arrived at the site, a man in a pressed black coat, accompanied by a security team. At first, people murmured, unsure of who he was. Bernard stepped forward, confused. Then he saw him. "Richard Halstead," the man said, extending a hand. "My grandfather founded this neighborhood, before it was ever turned into a development zone." Bernard shook his hand, wary. "I know who you are," he said. "I've seen the footage," Richard replied. "I've seen the corruption. My family's name doesn't mean wealth to me, it means legacy. I'd like to help, not as an investor, but as a builder." Bernard studied him. "Why now?" Richard smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what people can do when they believe in something real." They shook hands again, this time with purpose. Inside Bernard's office, the energy had shifted. A new whiteboard displayed every confirmed phase of the Halstead rebuild. Grace organized daily team huddles. Harold handled legal threats and media narratives. Anna had even launched a digital storytelling project interviewing displaced residents, former tenants, even construction workers. "I'm calling it the ground we stand on," she said. "It's about memory and what gets buried." Bernard hugged her tightly. "You're documenting a movement." She smiled. "I just want people to remember." But not all memories stayed buried. Late one night, as Bernard prepared his speech for an upcoming community summit, a package arrived unmarked, hand-delivered. Inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop. A video loaded. It showed a boardroom hidden camera footage. Derek, Elena, and a few others were in heated discussion. "We underestimated him," Derek was saying. "That man's not just rebuilding a neighborhood. He's rewriting the rulebook." "You want to stop him?" another voice asked. "Don't stop him," Elena said coldly. "Let him build. Let him finish the whole thing. Then we pull the floor out from under him, publicly, destroy his reputation when he's standing on his greatest achievement." Bernard leaned back, heart pounding. They were waiting, letting him build something beautiful just to watch it fall. He stared at the screen, jaw tight. Then he whispered, "Let them try." He closed the laptop. Outside the window, the city glowed in quiet defiance. Inside, Bernard's fire burned brighter than ever. Bernard sat alone in the glow of his office lamp, the video of Derek and Elena replaying in his mind. They weren't just fighting back, they were laying a trap. One designed to humiliate him at the peak of his progress. They wanted to poison the finish line, not stop the race. It was cold, calculated, and effective if he didn't act first. The next morning, Bernard met with Grace and Harold at a quiet diner just outside the city limits' neutral ground. "They want us to win," Bernard said, stirring his untouched coffee. "They want us to get all the way to the ribbon, and then hang ourselves with it." Grace narrowed her eyes. "They're waiting for one mistake." Harold leaned forward. "So what do we do? Stop building?" Bernard shook his head. We finish it. But we finish it in full view. Every contract, every receipt, every inspection report, we publish it online. We beat them with the truth, before they have a chance to twist it." Grace nodded slowly. "You want to run your own audit?" "Exactly," Bernard said. "We document everything, and I mean everything. I want a transparency wall higher than the towers they use to crush people." They left the diner with a new plan, one that didn't just protect them from attack, but rewrote the entire way community development would be managed going forward. Open source accountability, live-streamed board meetings, financials shared monthly. The public became the boardroom. The first real test came 2 days later, when a city inspector, clearly pressured by outside influence, delivered a stop work notice for safety violations. The crew stood stunned. Construction had been meticulous, double-checked. Bernard arrived within the hour. "What's the violation?" he asked. The inspector hesitated, holding his clipboard like a shield. "Irregularities in fire code compliance." "Which part?" "Section 4B9. Bernard pulled out the building plan, flipped to the page, and pointed. "We're exempt under the 2023 amendment. It's already been approved." The inspector's hand twitched. I wasn't told that." "No," Bernard said, calm but firm. "You weren't, because someone doesn't want you to know. I suggest you update your supervisor." The inspector made a call. 20 minutes later, the stop work notice was lifted. The crew erupted in cheers. Anna caught the moment on video. "That's going on the transparency page," she grinned. Despite the momentum, Bernard knew pressure was building behind the scenes. Elena had vanished from public view, but her digital fingerprints remained anonymous editorials questioning the legality of Bernard's funding, false rumors of criminal investigations, even whispers that he was planning to run for office as a political stunt. Grace tracked it all. "She's planting seeds," she said, waiting to watch them grow into doubt. Bernard didn't flinch. "Let her. We'll just plant louder." They launched a series of public workshops at the Halstead site: how to start a co-op, how to navigate zoning laws, how to fight back against evictions. These weren't speeches, they were tools. And people showed up in droves. One evening, a woman in her 70s approached Bernard after a workshop. "My son was pushed out of this neighborhood 5 years ago," she said, voice trembling. "He's gone now. But seeing you build this, it feels like someone's finally putting things back." Bernard took her hand. "We're not just rebuilding the block, we're restoring what they stole." That night, Bernard returned home to find Anna asleep on the couch, headphones on, laptop open. He gently lifted the headphones and heard her latest project, a podcast episode titled Bricks and Bloodlines. She was interviewing people, former tenants, new volunteers, even construction workers. Their stories wove together like a tapestry of memory and hope. Bernard sat listening in silence, eyes glassy. Grace walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "She says she wants to archive the soul of the neighborhood." Bernard smiled softly. "She already has." But the calm didn't last. 3 days later, just before sunrise, Bernard received a call from a whistleblower, an employee inside Oxley and Grant. "They're about to go public with a report," the voice said quickly, "alleging financial misconduct in your foundation fund. They forged bank records to make it look like you funneled money into a shell company overseas." Bernard's stomach dropped. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Major news networks already have it." The line went dead. He turned to Grace, who was now fully awake. "They're going nuclear." By noon, Bernard had summoned a press conference not just to deny the accusations, but to preempt them. "I have just been informed that a falsified report is being prepared to destroy the credibility of our project," he announced. "Let me be clear, there is no shell company, there is no diversion of funds, and we can prove it." He handed reporters a flash drive. "On this drive is every financial transaction made by the Halstead Foundation in the past 6 months. Independent audits, source receipts, bank confirmations. You'll find no gaps, no hidden trails." A reporter raised her hand. "Why release this now?" "Because justice delayed," Bernard said, "is justice denied." The next morning, the hit piece aired, but Bernard's data was already circulating. Analysts confirmed the documents were fakes. The entire smear unraveled within hours. Public sympathy boomeranged in his favor. Even national outlets began to question who was behind the attacks. Pressure mounted on Oxley and Grant. Protesters showed up at their headquarters. Whistleblowers stepped forward, naming names. Elena's silence became deafening. Back at the Halstead site, construction continued. Walls rose. Foundations solidified. But so did Bernard. This wasn't just a fight about property anymore. It was a fight about narrative, about who gets to tell the story and who gets erased. As Bernard stood under the rising frame of the new Hope Center, a hammer in his hand, he whispered to himself, "They tried to break the truth, but the truth bent back." And with each nail, he drove that truth deeper into the bones of the city. The chill of early spring settled over the city, but at the Halstead site, energy buzzed like summer lightning. The frame of the Hope Center stood tall, wrapped in scaffolding and guarded by loyal volunteers who now took shifts around the clock, not because they were asked, but because they believed. Inside the trailer office, Bernard stood before a wall of pinned-up blueprints, contracts, and construction permits. He'd turned the entire space into a living testament of transparency, a real-time shrine to accountability. Grace entered holding 2 coffees, her face drawn but focused. "Legal team confirmed," she said, handing him a cup. The smear campaign's source was traced to a private consultancy firm, one that does regular work with Oxley and Grant. Bernard took a sip, his jaw tightening. "But no direct fingerprints from Derek or Elena?" "Not yet," she replied. "They're too careful." Bernard looked out the trailer window, where Anna played hopscotch with a group of neighborhood kids near the construction zone. Her laughter echoed faintly. It was the sound of peace, and it made what came next even harder. "We need to go public with the video," he said softly. Grace blinked. "The hidden camera footage?" He nodded. "It's the only way to show people this isn't just a corporate feud. It's a sabotage of a public movement. They need to see the intent. But it's risky," Grace warned. "They'll spin it, say it was obtained illegally, accuse you of espionage." "Let them," Bernard replied. "The truth doesn't hide anymore. Neither do I." That night, Bernard uploaded the footage to a secured public archive, accompanied by a single statement. "This is the conversation they never wanted you to hear." It took less than 2 hours to spread. News anchors paused their scripts. Radio stations replayed clips on loop. Social media exploded with fury. The footage of Elena's cold words, "Let him build, then we pull the floor out from under him," was now etched into public memory. Community leaders issued statements of support. Politicians distanced themselves from Oxley and Grant. The consultancy firm implicated in the fake financial report announced an internal review. But Bernard knew what came next wouldn't be applause. It would be war. He was right. By morning, Elena re-emerged. In a carefully curated video, she sat at a polished mahogany desk, speaking in calm, wounded tones. "This footage is misleading," she said. "A private conversation taken out of context. I never wished harm upon Mr. Harlan. I was simply voicing concern about oversight and structure in large-scale community efforts." Bernard watched from the trailer, face unreadable. Grace muttered, "She's good. She's scared," Bernard replied. "And when people like her get scared, they make mistakes." Still, the damage was far from undone. A new lawsuit landed on Bernard's desk the following day, this one accusing him of defamation, breach of privacy, and corporate slander. Harold read the document, then looked up grimly. "They're dragging you into the legal abyss. Even if you win, the process could tie you up for years." Bernard stood quietly. "Then we keep building while we fight. One doesn't cancel the other." Amidst the legal chaos, Bernard made a surprise appearance at a local town hall. He wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to listen. Dozens of residents gathered in a modest church basement, voices overlapping with concern, hope, and hard-won skepticism. "I've seen developers talk pretty before," one man said, "but they always disappear after the ribbon cutting." Bernard nodded. "That's why I'm not leaving when the ribbon falls. The Halstead Center isn't my legacy. It's my beginning." A young woman raised her hand. "What happens if you lose in court?" "Then I'll show up the next day with a toolbox," Bernard answered. "Because courtrooms don't build communities, people do." Applause followed, not thunderous, but steady. Like trust, it was slow building and real. Back at home, Anna sat with Grace on the couch, working on her podcast transcript. Bernard entered, dropping his coat over a chair, exhaustion in every step. "Long day?" Grace asked. He sat beside them and smiled faintly. "Depends how you measure it. We lost a contractor today, backed out after the lawsuit news, but a group of local artists offered to paint the center's interior for free. So, maybe even. I'll not park it up. Can I interview them for the next episode?" Bernard nodded. "They'd love that." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We're still winning, right?" "We're still standing," he said. "And sometimes, that's the same thing." But as night deepened, the ghost finally knocked. At 2:13 r.m., Bernard's phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. He answered anyway. A voice spoke low, familiar, deliberate. "I warned you once," Derek said. "Now I'm telling you. Stop. Walk away before this gets uglier." Bernard didn't flinch. "You already made it ugly." "You think you're the hero?" Derek growled. "You're just a man with a hammer, trying to patch a dam with duct tape. We own the system. Always have." Bernard's voice was ice. "Then I'll build my own." Silence. Then the line went dead. He stared at the screen, heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity. They were coming for him, which meant he was close. So close, he could already see the day when the ribbon fell, and no one could pull the floor out again. He got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the glowing skeleton of the Halstead Center rising against the night sky. One more chapter had turned, and there was no turning back. The sun rose heavy the next morning, casting long amber lines across the construction site. Bernard arrived early, earlier than anyone else, standing alone before the towering frame of the Halstead Center. The steel beams reached for the sky, half finished, but firm like the idea of justice itself, solid, unyielding. He ran a hand across the wood, planks stacked neatly at the entrance. Each nail driven, each board placed, felt like a small act of rebellion now. With every passing day, the center stood not just as a physical space, but a challenge to everything Derek and Elena represented. But today wasn't about them. Today was about roots. Inside the community meeting room, still raw with exposed beams and temporary lighting, Bernard met with a group of elders, black men and women who had lived through decades of displacement, broken promises, and shattered neighborhoods. They sat in a circle, their presence commanding more than any judge or CEO could. "Why now?" one of them asked bluntly. "Why do you care, Bernard? You're not one of us." There was no malice in the tone, just history. Bernard nodded slowly. "You're right. I didn't grow up here, but I grew up broken. I know what it means to be discarded, to have your worth measured by how quietly you suffer. This project, this fight isn't charity, it's responsibility." Another elder, Miss Lenora, leaned in. "And what happens when they tear it down again?" Bernard looked her in the eyes. "Then we build again, and again, until the idea becomes too loud to be silenced." Silence hung in the air, thick and reverent. Then, quietly, she reached into her bag and handed him a photo, a faded picture of a street corner from 1967, kids playing, a grocery store, a church, a life before it was swept away by development. "This is where the center stands now," she said. "It was ours once. Maybe it can be again." That afternoon, Anna's podcast aired a new episode titled, "What Was Taken?" It featured those same elders, telling their stories, no edits, no filters. It was raw, painful, and defiant. Bernard listened from the site office, eyes closed, heart full. Then Harold burst in. "They filed an injunction." Bernard blinked. "What kind?" "Emergency stop on all construction," Harold said, slapping the papers down. "Filed in federal court, based on irregularities in land acquisition. They're going for a full shutdown." Bernard stood slowly. "Can they win?" Harold hesitated. "If they convince the judge, yes. Even if it's temporary, it stalls everything, delays permits, drains support. They want to freeze the momentum." Grace arrived moments later, reading the same papers, her expression unreadable. "They're using their last card," she said. "Fear." Bernard's eyes narrowed. "Then we answer it with something stronger." The next day, Bernard called a press conference, not for lawyers, not for damage control. For the people. They gathered at the site. Reporters, families, volunteers, kids with paint-streaked cheeks from art day, elders in wheelchairs, teens with skateboards. This wasn't a protest. It was a testimony. Bernard stood before them, flanked by Grace and Anna. The wind tugged at his coat, but his voice never wavered. "They want to shut us down. Again," he said. "They want to drag us into a courtroom and bury us in red tape. But this isn't about permits. It's about presence." He pointed behind him to the steel skeleton of the center. "They think they're filing papers against a building. But what they're really trying to stop is a neighborhood from remembering who it is." Cheers erupted. "This center is built on history, on memory, on resistance, and no judge, no firm, no corporation will unbuild what's already been reclaimed." Anna stepped forward, small but certain. "They said we didn't belong here," she said into the mic. "But we never left. We were just waiting for the ground to be ours again." A tear rolled down Bernard's cheek as he put a hand on her shoulder. The crowd roared. Behind the scenes, Bernard's legal team worked overtime. Volunteers formed digital squads fact-checking documents, exposing inconsistencies in Oxley and Grant's filings, crowdsourcing timelines and property records. It worked. Within 72 hours, the judge issued a pause, not a shutdown, a temporary stay until all claims could be reviewed. It wasn't a win, but it was a breath. And sometimes, breath was all you needed to keep going. That night, Bernard found himself walking alone through the unfinished hallways of the Halstead Center. The skeletal beams cast long shadows under the moonlight. He ran his hand along the raw wood, thinking of all the hands that would touch these walls, seeking shelter, healing, hope. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a flicker, a figure stepping from the shadows. It was Elena. She stood alone, dressed in gray, her posture elegant but tired. You shouldn't be here, Bernard said. I wanted to see it, she replied, before it's either finished or gone. Bernard crossed his arms. Looking for regrets? No, she said. Just history. They stood in silence. Then she added, You've changed. Bernard tilted his head. Number, I just stopped pretending. She nodded. They'll come for you harder now. I know. Elena turned to leave, then paused. They were never afraid of what you'd build, Bernard. They were afraid people would believe they deserved it. And with that, she vanished into the dark. Bernard stood there, pulse steady, breath even. They could come, but the foundation was already laid. And this time, it wasn't built by one man but by many, anchored not in cement but in the will of a people who refused to vanish. And that, he knew, couldn't be torn down. Monday dawned with a cold wind sweeping across the city, as if nature itself was bracing for what was to come. In the heart of downtown, the courthouse stood like a relic, tall, stern, unmoved by time or truth. But today, its marble halls would bear witness to something different. Today, justice wasn't wearing a suit. It wore boots, calloused hands, and the voices of 100 displaced families. Bernard arrived with Grace and Harold by his side. Behind them came a procession, volunteers in construction gear, elders from Halstead's past, students who'd skipped class to stand for something bigger. Anna walked beside her mother, clutching a sign that read, You can't bulldoze memory. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick. Oxley and Grant's lawyers, polished, cold, and overprepared, occupied one side like a row of statues. Bernard and his team sat opposite, visibly outnumbered but not outmatched. The judge, an older black woman named Justice Marla Boone, entered with quiet authority. Her eyes swept the room, reading more than briefs. The proceedings began. Oxley and Grant's lead counsel launched into a detailed assault, accusing the Halstead project of violating zoning ordinances, misusing community funds, ignoring historical preservation codes. They used words like reckless, unauthorized, and destabilizing. Then it was Harold's turn. He rose calmly, adjusted his glasses, and began dismantling each claim with meticulous precision. The historical preservation claim is unfounded, he said, holding up documentation. The area was rezoned 2 years ago under community petition signed by over 1,400 residents. He moved on to the funding issue. All financials have been made public. We invite the court to review them in real time through our transparency portal. The data is verifiable and open source. He ended with a simple line. This is not a building, it's a recovery. Justice Boone nodded, taking notes slowly. Then she looked to Bernard. Mr. Harlan, do you wish to speak before we recess for review? Bernard stood. I do, Your Honor. He walked to the center of the room, no papers in hand, no script to read from, just presence. I was raised to believe that if something was broken, you fixed it. That if someone was left behind, you reached back. That belief isn't in a blueprint, it's in a promise. To this city, to its people. He glanced at the opposing table. They argue legality. I argue legacy. What's happening in Halstead isn't just permitted, it's necessary. It's a response to decades of being pushed out, priced out, shut out. He paused, letting silence carry weight. This case isn't about one project. It's about whether this city is willing to make room for everyone, not just those who can afford to reshape it. When he returned to his seat, the courtroom was silent. But it was the kind of silence that holds its breath for what comes next. Outside, the crowd had grown. The courthouse steps were covered in handmade signs. People stood with arms linked, singing, not shouting, singing. Anna stood with them, leading a chant that had become the unofficial anthem of the Halstead revival. We are still here. We are still home. Inside, the judge took hours to deliberate. Bernard waited with Grace in the quiet of a back hallway. She's thinking hard, Grace whispered. She's thinking fair, Bernard corrected. Finally, the bailiff called them back in. Everyone stood as Justice Boone returned to the bench. She looked tired, but resolute. I have reviewed the claims, counterclaims, and evidence provided. I have also taken into account the public nature and transparency of the Halstead project, which frankly is unprecedented. She folded her hands. The injunction request is denied. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. She continued, Furthermore, this court recommends a formal review of Oxley and Grant's filings. given discrepancies in documentation and potentially fraudulent exhibits submitted. Bernard's breath caught. Justice Boone's gaze landed on him. This court does not exist to protect corporate interests. It exists to uphold the law, and when that law serves the people, it must serve all people. The gavel came down, and just like that, the project was free. The celebration outside the courthouse turned into a march, peaceful, powerful. People poured into Halstead that night, singing, clapping, cooking food in pop-up tents, writing memories and dreams on the wooden beams of the center. Bernard stood at the heart of it all, a storm of hugs and tears and gratitude surrounding him. "You didn't just win," Grace whispered. "You proved it could be done." Anna ran up, tugging his hand. "Come see what I made." She pulled him inside the unfinished youth center wing. On one wall, a giant mural had begun. Community artists had sketched outlines. Anna had started filling them in. It was a tree. Each branch held scenes of the neighborhood's past church picnics, barber shops, jazz musicians, protest lines. At the base was a foundation of bricks. Each brick had a name. Anna pointed to one. "It's yours," she said. "I put you under the roots." Bernard swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have," he said softly. She grinned. Too late. They stood there in the paint-scented quiet, the voices outside fading into a warm hum. He knelt beside her and picked up a brush. "All right then," he smiled. "Let's finish what we started." And together, they painted not just for walls, but for memory, for all that had been lost, for all that was now finally being found. The euphoria of victory didn't last long. 3 nights after the court ruling, the Halstead Center was vandalized. Bernard arrived at dawn to find shattered glass across the main entrance. Graffiti smeared across the temporary fencing read, "This isn't your city." The mural Anna had helped paint was defaced. Thick black paint slashed across the roots and names. The tree bled color onto the floor. Silence settled heavy. Anna stood frozen, her small fists clenched at her sides, eyes wide and disbelieving. Grace gently placed a hand on her shoulder, but Anna didn't move. Bernard walked to the center of the mural, dropped to one knee, and reached out. His fingers traced the smeared outline of his name. It was still there, beneath the mess, still present, still rooted. The police arrived, took statements, shook their heads. No cameras, no witnesses, no promises. "It's intimidation," Harold muttered, "plain and simple." Grace looked around at the stunned volunteers. "And it's a warning. They're not finished." Bernard rose slowly. "Neither are we." Within hours, the community responded not with fear, but fury. Dozens of people arrived with buckets, soap, brushes, paint. Elders brought hot food, teens brought music, and Anna, without a word, picked up a brush and began repainting the roots of the tree. By nightfall, the mural was brighter than before, more vivid, more defiant. A banner was hung over the front door. "Break the glass, not the spirit." The next day, Bernard met with city officials, demanding increased protection. The mayor, previously quiet, finally stepped forward publicly. "What happened at Halstead was an attack on all of us," she said. "The city will provide full security and support to ensure this center not only survives but thrives." It was the first time Bernard felt the wind shift at the top, but he also knew better, because that same evening, he received a package at his doorstep, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a single photo. It was of Elena and Derek, smiling, with Anna in the background blurred, but unmistakably her taken through a telephoto lens. She had been walking home from school. Bernard's heart stopped. This wasn't corporate anymore. It was personal. He gripped the photo so tightly it crumpled in his hand. He didn't tell Anna, or Grace, not yet. But the message was clear: back off or pay. Still, Bernard didn't pause. He doubled down. He brought in private security, moved Grace and Anna into a safer location temporarily, and called for another town meeting. This one, however, was different. It was closed door. Inside the unfinished cafeteria of the Halstead Center, Bernard spoke not just to supporters, but to leaders, pastors, educators, retired city planners, former activists who had once marched in the 62nd and 72nd and were now watching history try to repeat itself. "We're close," Bernard said. "That's why they're desperate. This isn't just about stopping a building anymore. It's about silencing a movement. A pastor named Elijah raised his hand. So what's the move now? Bernard looked around the room. We go public fully. We document everything. We tell this story like it's gospel. We let the world see what it means to rebuild from nothing, and we expose every shadow they hide behind. He paused. And we finish construction on time. There was silence, then applause, then a standing ovation. In the weeks that followed, Halstead became more than a project. It became a stage. Anna's podcast was picked up by a national outlet. Bernard was invited to speak at citywide events, then state ones. News crews set up semi-permanent posts near the site, covering every beam installed, every sidewalk poured, every mural repainted. Elena and Derek went silent. Rumors swirled that their board was fracturing. Investors were pulling out. Their influence, once untouchable, now seemed brittle under scrutiny. But Bernard didn't celebrate. He worked 12 hours a day, sometimes more. He led morning huddles with the crew. He stood on ladders, poured concrete. Saturday on the floor with kids during design workshops. The Halstead Center wasn't a legacy anymore. It was a life. One rainy afternoon, Bernard stood alone in what would soon become the auditorium. The echo of his footsteps bounced off the high beams, the smell of sawdust mixed with the tang of wet concrete. He closed his eyes. He saw it finished. Rows of children laughing, seniors teaching music, mothers holding poetry readings. A place not just of refuge, but of return. Behind him, Grace entered quietly. "You okay?" she asked. He turned, eyes shining. "Yeah, he paused. "I needed to feel it." One last time before the doors open. She nodded. "We're almost there." He smiled. "We are. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her the crumpled photo. Grace's breath caught. "You waited to show me this?" "I didn't want fear to guide our next step," he said. "Only purpose." She stared at him. "And now?" "Now we finish," he said simply. "But we keep our eyes wide open." On the evening of the final inspection, as city officials arrived and volunteers gathered to witness, Bernard stood by the doors of the Halstead Center, his hand resting on the cool metal handle. Across the street, in the shadow of a dark sedan, a figure watched. Derek. For a brief moment, their eyes met. And in that moment, Bernard didn't see power or pride in the man. He saw something smaller. Loneliness. Then Derek turned and disappeared into the night. And Bernard opened the doors. To light. To music. To a crowd that surged forward not to tear down, but to enter what they had all built. Together, the opening day of the Halstead Center arrived like the sunrise after a long storm, slow, golden, and unbelievable. The early morning fog clung to the streets, but the building stood tall, glass glinting in the soft light, flags fluttering gently at its entrance. The banner above the front doors had been replaced. It now read, in bold letters, "Welcome home." Crowds gathered even before the ribbon was cut. Families from every part of the city, elders in wheelchairs, young children on shoulders, couples hand in hand pressed close to the entrance. Inside, the building buzzed with final touches, signs being hung, coffee being brewed, name tags handed out. Volunteers moved like dancers in a well-rehearsed routine, each one smiling, some tearing up when they looked around at what they'd helped create. Bernard stood in his office, looking out over it all. He wore a simple dark blazer, no tie, and a pin on his lapel that read, "Rooted in Halstead." Behind him, on the shelf, sat the crumpled photo that had once been a threat. He'd framed it not as a trophy, but a reminder of what fear looked like, of how power behaves when it's cornered. Anna burst in without knocking. "You're going to miss it," she shouted. Bernard turned, laughing. "Miss what?" "The ribbon. You're the one with the scissors, remember?" He followed her down the hallway, past the murals now fully restored and expanded. One wall bore the faces of the community, laughing children, street musicians, grocery store owners, teachers, mothers, and fathers. The roots of the tree had grown wider, deeper, entwining history with hope. Outside, Grace stood at the podium. She introduced Bernard as the crowd cheered, though many had already started chanting his name even before she finished speaking. He stepped up to the mic, took a deep breath, and let the sound settle. "Thank you," he began. Not for this moment, but for every moment that came before it. He looked out across the sea of faces, people who had stood with him through cold nights, courtrooms, smears, and broken glass. This center isn't the result of my work, he continued. It's the result of your belief. You believed that a neighborhood's worth wasn't tied to property values, that its soul couldn't be sold or zoned away. You believed in community when others only saw opportunity. He held up the large silver scissors. So let's cut this ribbon. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. The crowd counted down. On one, the ribbon was sliced clean, and the cheers erupted like fireworks. The Halstead Center was open. Inside, the programs began immediately. Children rushed to the library where shelves were already stacked with books donated from around the country. Elders found the Wellness Center, where free screenings and tea were offered. Artists unveiled installations. Local chefs provided samples in the community kitchen. In the auditorium, Anna took the stage, nervous but ready. Her podcast had been given a live segment, now officially part of the center's youth storytelling initiative. She adjusted the mic. I want to tell you about a man who changed everything for us, she began, but also about a neighborhood that taught him how. Bernard listened from the back of the room, his arms crossed loosely, pride rising in his chest like a quiet hymn. Later that evening, the final event of the day was held in the courtyard. A candlelight vigil not for mourning, but remembrance. Each attendee lit a candle in honor of someone lost, to gentrification, to violence, to silence. One by one, the names were read aloud. Then came the final name. Halstead, the speaker said, not a person, but a promise. The wind was still. The candles flickered in unison. Bernard looked to the sky, then back at the building behind him, lit from within, glowing like a beacon. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fix anything. He simply stood still and let the warmth settle. In the weeks that followed, the Halstead Center became more than a headline. It became a hub. Former gang members taught music lessons. Retired nurses offered parenting classes. Grandmothers started a weekly soul food night that had standing room only. The garden out back grew vegetables and friendships. City officials visited regularly, not for photo ops, but to learn. Even corporations reached out. One letter arrived from Derek, handwritten. It read, "You won, but you didn't just win. You changed the rules. I won't pretend to understand how, but maybe one day, I'll try." Bernard folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetfulness. One Sunday morning, Bernard sat on the front steps of the center, sipping coffee as the neighborhood slowly woke around him. The sound of birds, kids biking, the smell of bacon from a nearby window. Anna plopped down beside him, still in pajamas. "You ever gonna sleep again?" she teased. Eventually, he grinned. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You think it'll last?" she asked softly. He looked out at the street, at the families walking to church, at the mural that stretched across the wall, at the open doors. "Yes," he said, "because it's not just built in cement, it's built in people." She smiled. "That sounds like something I'd put in my podcast." He laughed. "Then you better write it down before I forget." And there, in the quiet of a Sunday morning, with no audience, no pressure, and no deadline, Bernard Harlan finally exhaled. Not because the fight was over, but because, for the first time, the future no longer felt like a battle. It felt like a home, and the sound of belonging was louder than fear ever was. The story of the Halstead Center teaches us that true justice is not won in courtrooms or boardrooms. It is built, day by day, in the hearts of communities who refuse to be erased. It reminds us that even in the face of betrayal, threats, and broken systems, resilience can triumph when ordinary people come together with extraordinary courage. Most importantly, it shows that healing begins when we stop asking for permission to belong and start creating spaces where everyone is seen, heard, and valued.